Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our primary maths webinar. My name is Elizabeth Ivory, and I am Head of Marketing and Communications at Folens. So what do we have planned for you this evening? Well, first up, we will be joined by Elaine Dillon, experienced author and teacher, who will take us through preparing for the new maths curriculum, problem solving in junior classrooms. Followed by Elaine, I will give you a very quick update, and then we will come on to an opportunity for you to ask Elaine or Karen, who will be joining us, our Head of Primary Publishing, to ask any questions that you have. If you do have any questions, all you have to do is pop them into the chat box, which you should see at the top of your screen, and we'll get through as many of them as we can at the very end. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Elaine. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm just going to share my screen here. And let's see. Now, here we go. All right, welcome everybody. You're very welcome to this evening's webinar, talking about problem solving and what might it look like in our junior classrooms. As Elizabeth said, my name is Elaine Dillon. I'm currently teaching senior infants in Bishop Shannon National School in South Dublin. I think I'm on my 14th year of teaching now at this stage, and the majority of those have been in junior primary. A couple of years ago, I completed my Masters of Education, and I was looking at, I suppose, mathematics in the early years. And one of the most common themes that kept coming up and up again was play. So that inspired me to look at an actual research where I looked at play and how can I use it effectively to develop children's mathematical thinking. During that time, I became aware of the Maths for All website, which is a professional development website. It's led by Siún Nagura from DCU. Some amazing videos and clips and resources available to us as teachers to think about how we teach mathematics in our classroom. I learned a lot from it. I had an opportunity to share my research that I suppose developed as part of my master's, called Notice, Explore, Talk About Mathematics. I'll explain a little bit more of that soon. But also I think it's important to note that there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes there in terms of having conversations about maths education. At the minute, I'm involved with the professional learning community with fellow teachers at Maths for All, and we're looking at how can we best support teachers in improving our practice of teaching mathematics. So I'll move on, and tonight's webinar, I'm going to look at, of course, problem solving in junior classrooms. I'm going to set a little bit of the scene for that, and then I'm going to look at problem solving in children's play, and then we're going to look at this idea of rich mathematical tasks across junior primary. So what I'm going to ask you to do for me, if you don't mind, we're going to collect a little bit of data. If you don't mind, there's going to be a poll. I think it's going to pop up somewhere on your screen, or it could be up in the top taskbar, and it's just going to ask you just to give us an idea of what class groups are you teaching. Just and hopefully I've covered everybody, just so a little bit of idea for myself and just to see where we're all coming from this evening. So let's have a little look at this idea of developing mathematical proficiency. So as you're all aware, we have a new curriculum that will be coming towards us at some stage for mathematics. At the moment, on the NCCA website, there's so much research available to us, and we have what is known to us as the draft primary mathematical curriculum. For me, I really got into looking at this research as part of my master's, and I delved deeply into, I suppose, mathematics in the early years. And when I read wide on it, there was lots of really interesting ideas and research coming away from it. But one of the key things that really stood to me was this importance of building a strong foundation of mathematics in the early years. So when we talk about early years, we're talking from 0 to 8, so it's including right up into second class. That idea that building a very strong foundation in these years can not only develop children's mathematical development later, but also help their literacy achievements and their wider curricular areas. So I think it's a really powerful thing to be thinking about, is like setting up a very strong foundation of mathematics in the early years and how that can benefit the children as they move forward in their learning. I think for me, the thing with thinking of a new curriculum, it's quite daunting, the ideas of implementing a new curriculum, but I think it's just important to remember, like, the laws of mathematics, they're not changing, they're constant. And I think this new draft curriculum is an opportunity for us to refocus, an opportunity for us to think, what does it mean to be mathematical, and how do we support the children and support learning in this area. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on our practices and develop it as a result. And it's important to remember we're on a journey with this as well. So, you know, it's not going to be something that's going to be quick, that we are on a journey, and to be kind to ourselves. And you've already started a journey by tuning into conversations like the one that we're going to have here this evening. And so I really hope that tonight's webinar start some kind of conversations for you. Maybe they're already happening in your classroom, and this is why you're here, or sorry, in your school, and this is why you're here. This has brought you here. That's exactly my aim for here, is to start conversations and to have a little think about what is maths, what's happening in our classrooms already. You probably might see a lot of similarities across your classrooms when you see some of the things I presented to you this evening, and then how can we refine them, how can we improve our practices, because I'm also here to learn too. So let's have a little look at some of the sentiments, I suppose, that in the primary mathematical curriculum draft format on the NCCA website. There's some, I suppose, really nice sentiments, and I think some really important ones, like this idea of mathematics is everywhere and it's for everyone. I'm pretty sure every single body here will probably know someone, maybe a family member, or, you know, a friend, a colleague, or a student that you've taught, or a student that you're teaching, that says, I don't like mathematics. Mathematics isn't for me. I'm not very good at mathematics. So that narrative, it's such a big obstacle in their way of developing mathematics. And I think, like, when we think about the opportunity now for the new curriculum coming, it is really an opportunity to, I suppose, engage with that narrative and be like, there is an opportunity to think that isn't true, because mathematics is for everyone, and mathematics is for everyone. And one of the things, I suppose, from the new curriculum is helping children to see how mathematics is part of their everyday lives, and building up that idea of a productive disposition for mathematics. And you will hear me talking a lot about that during the presentation this evening, because it's a big part of my own research, and it was part of my classroom practice, is helping children see that mathematics is in their lives and their everyday play, and it has such a part, such a value for them. I think that when I think back to the first time I was teaching senior infants, might have been back in 2014, I think it was. Got away from it for many years, and now I'm back at it again. But I remember being kind of at sea a little bit with how I was teaching mathematics, and it was one of those things, was I wasn't enjoying teaching it, and I knew the children weren't really, they were doing mathematics, but they weren't really enjoying it. And I think that really started me off on this pathway of looking for something to improve my teaching of mathematics. Because for me, I always I feel very that I had a very positive experience with mathematics as I was growing up, and and you know, a lot of times people say, oh, you like maths, you must be very good at maths. But you know, I think, like, okay, I'm okay at maths, but I would say, you know, you're an expert in it or anything like that. But I think, you know, it's about sticking with it, giving things a go, you know, having the grit with it, trying to try it out, willing to take on that challenge, seeing the connections, seeing the patterns. Like, there's so much energy and enthusiasm that you can really build when you really delve deep into a rich mathematical task or a rich mathematical problem. And I'm hoping that through the examples tonight that you might see, I suppose, the thinking behind this. I think that teaching through problem solving, or using like a problem solving approach to teaching, allows us to develop what the primary curriculum is looking at, mathematical proficiency. So with that idea, we're not just looking at procedural fluency, you know, that idea of sitting down and just doing the same type of task over and over and over again. Like, there's so many more components that are required, equally required, to help make to help develop mathematical proficiency. And that's I think it's a very important thing for us as we go into this new curriculum, to really keep our thoughts on all of those ingredients, that are needed to help children develop mathematical proficiency. This particular image from the primary maths draft curriculum, I really like it, and there's something just that speaks to me about it, how all of these are interconnected to each other. And this is in the primary mathematical curriculum section, where it's talking about practice in the classroom, and it's about ideas about these 5 pedagogies and how we can use them to bring the curriculum alive and to enact it into our classrooms. And I suppose using rich mathematical tasks, like some of them we'll explore now that are in my problem solving journal, and these really allow us to engage with these pedagogies as teachers, and therefore we're really going to support children's mathematical proficiency. Should mention, if you do have any questions, please do pop them into the chat box as we go. So let's have a little look at children's play. And I couldn't do a webinar on problem solving without having a little look at children's play. And I think that it's important to say at this stage, before I go any further, that as I said, this is all about having conversations about mathematics and getting us having a little thought, a little think about what we're doing, and maybe what's already available to us at our classroom. And you might see a lot of similarities and realize, you know, you're already have so many opportunities to develop children's problem solving skills in your classroom, especially when I go through some of these slides in a few moments. But you know, it's also important to say that there's no one size fits all. This works really well in my classroom. And unfortunately there's no carbon copy where, you know, you can take exactly what I'm doing and do it in another classroom. But you know, because we're all experts in our own classroom, you know your class the best, the more than I know my own class. And the class that I have this year, I know where, you know, that, you know, they really like maths, and I can push them in certain directions, and I can allow them have a lot of freedom in terms of their tasks, because I know they're I suppose they're looking for it, and they want that challenge, and that's things to remind yourself that you know your own class. You are the expert in your own class, and hopefully that you might get some snippets from this that might be inspiring to try some things out in your own classroom, or as I say, you might all realize you're already doing it in your classroom. So in terms of problem solving in children's play, children are natural problem solvers. Problem solving refers to children's ability to overcome obstacles that they meet when they're playing and they're undertaking activities. And all the interactions which play I suppose brings for them, they are dynamic, and they provide children with opportunities to be risk takers and opportunities for them to problem solve. In this little picture here, in my class this year in senior infants, when they were using the polydrone at the start, they were always just making it as wide as possibly can. So like they were covering as much area of the floor they could possibly can. Then after a little while, they started building towers. So then they got into really trying to make it as tall as they possibly could. And then as the time went on, they started thinking we wanted to make some kind of structure, so, you know, some kind of 3D structure. So then they got into this idea of we want to make it big enough for one person to fit in. And then they moved on. Then over time, the next step was to fit 2 people in. And they kept constantly trying to change it and trying to come up with different solutions and different ideas. And they were very creative in their approach to just a big box of polydrone. Eventually, then I think they were trying to squeeze three, maybe potentially 4 children into this particular image. And you know, they were working with the tools that they had, and that was all of the particular shapes that they had of the polydrone. And then they're like, we need a roof. So off they went and got the lid of the box that these are stored in. And you know, there was just so many great conversations, even just about how they were building it, how many there was across, how many wide it was, how many tall was it. You know, no big discussions. Is this like a 3D shape? You know, was it a cube or a cuboid? There was a lovely, I suppose, playful way to discuss some of the mathematics that they had been learning. And for me, when I was doing my research, I was looking at play, and I came across this lovely mantra that I think it was used in an Australian program called Notice, Explore and Talk About Mathematics. And that was a lovely mantra because it just allowed me to zoom in on the play that was already happening in my classroom, And but for me to have like fresh eyes to go back and say, actually, like what are the children playing? And I wasn't just going in and thinking about the language they were using. It was like, how are they playing this? What were they playing with this? And I was guided by this Ginsberg's 3 types of mathematical play. And Ginsberg says children play with mathematics in their everyday play. Of course, not all play is mathematics, but quite a large proportion of it actually is. And when you dig deep, you'd be really surprised of the mathematics that are available to us as teachers. So he said there's a mathematics embedded in play. So that's children make sense of things by using mathematics in their play. There is play when it's centered on mathematics. So ideas of when the children are just really focused on counting, or they're focused on making patterns, or when they're playing with making the longest snake or the longest train. And then this idea of children playing with mathematics that they had been taught. So that's the idea of they're recreating the ideas that may have been taught in more discrete mathematical lessons. So bearing all that in mind, I went into this particular time I was teaching junior infants. And these are all moments from junior infant play. And the first one here was when the children were playing with the zoo. When I went over here, the children were all lined up for the zoo, I was told, and the time of the zoo was opening was 9 o'clock. So we were talking about time. We're talking about sequence of the day, so it was morning. And I said, oh, they're early at the play, they're at the zoo. And, you know, then the conversation got a little bit deeper. They said, oh, they have to be early because we only have a certain amount of tickets for the zoo today. So if you're not in the top, I can't remember the exact number at the time, but you won't get into the zoo. So that idea that their play was centered on mathematics. So they had to be early, they had to be a certain number, because otherwise they weren't going to get into the zoo today. And, you know, by stopping and noticing and exploring what they were doing, there were so many opportunities for me to talk about mathematics. And then, you know, I love that phrase, I wonder. Sometimes I don't know myself what's going to come out after I wonder, but, you know, you're trying to create little problems for them. You're trying to create little scenarios for them so they can come up with solutions. So it's not your most typical mathematical problem solving, but you're really getting them to think and come up with this idea of using their problem solving skills. And then by the end of it, you know, I'm highlighting to them, I'm like, I really like all of your math skills you were using today. I love your counting, and I love the way you were talking about your time. So I'm highlighting to them that all the maths that they were using in the play. And the little second scenario, they were the doctor's surgery, I think it was, and this little boy was waiting on the doctor, only 1 patient, and then we talked about how many seats didn't have patients, and then we said, you know, like posed a little problem. It's like, I wonder now if 5 more came into the doctor's surgery, what would happen? And you know, the child was like, 3 of them could sit down and 2 of them would have to stand up. So like they're using part whole there in terms of giving me an answer to that. So, and that was very natural to them. They almost they didn't have to overthink about it. It very much made sense. So it was something that had meaning for them. And again, like that, explored it with them, and I talked about all the mathematics they were using, and therefore, you know, you're building up the value for mathematics, and you're building up that productive disposition to can see how maths is used in real world and how they use their maths learning. The last little scenario, I quite enjoyed this one because when I went over, they were saying, I think this was cafes that we were doing, and it was a little restaurant that they had built. And they were like, it's a very small restaurant. And I was like, okay, what do you mean by that? They're like, we only have 4 tables. And I was like, how many people can you fit in your restaurant at a time? And I was simply told only 4, because there was only 1 person per table. So you can see the thinking that's going on there. And I was saying, oh, well, why did we do that? And what they did was they were relating back to an activity they were doing, a more discrete maths lesson there, where had been doing more or less, and we had the idea of like, well, you could partner them up, and then you find out which one is longer. You know, you can see which side has more and which side has less. And you know, that's exactly what they were doing here. They were partnered a little person to the table, and in this case, they had found the little people in the box of Lego, and then they just made the exact amount of tables for the little people, so they had the same amount. And then I kind of tried to explore it a little bit further with them. I was like, oh, what happens if more customers come? Like, you know, trying to set up like a little problem situation for them. And then they were like, don't worry, it's a very fast restaurant. For somebody, I think somebody said at the start, they'll just have to wait. But then the next time was like, no, it's okay. It's a fast restaurant. the food be served fast, they'll eat fast, and then they'll go out and then more people will come in. So even just the reasoning behind it was really interesting to hear. And by zoning in, for me, even just being aware of that the children are using maths as part of their play, it really highlighted to me really great conversations that I could have with the children. It allowed me as a teacher that formative assessment, just to see who's making connections, who's not making connections, how's their counting skills. There's just such a wide scope, and you're recording that maybe through little observations as you're walking around, or maybe by the end of it you're waiting down to sit back down and write down some of the things that you heard throughout their play sessions. In this particular one, I think I actually can't see the chat box right now. So, but if you want to drop something into the chat, like what do you notice about this particular tower, for a few moments. So, what do you notice? And while you're doing that, like I just really like the idea that children are likened to mathematicians because they ask the deep question, they invent solutions, they apply mathematics to solve real problems, and then they play with the mathematics. And mathematics then is illustrated as a language children can use to communicate and reason with their understanding in the world around them. And this particular one, the children were, I think it was still the cafes and restaurants theme. And when I went over to them, they had built a hotel. And then they went on to tell me that there was a restaurant in the hotel. And we just had a great talk about it. It was a tall hotel. What does tall mean? And then they went on to say, you know, it has lots of layers. And so we developed that language. Like, oh, we know we'd use stories or we'd use floors. So how could we figure out how many stories tall this building was? So we had an opportunity to look at counting, and we looked at how were they using their one-to-one when they were counting, where were they starting when they were counting, did they get that concept of cardinal number, did they know the last number that they counted meant that's exactly the amount of stories that's in this building. So as I was getting to check all of that with my junior infants. And then one of the children said, this is a pattern hotel. But you can look at it, it looks like a very complex pattern. And I was like, oh, well, tell me more. What does a pattern mean? And like, can you explain it to me? And off they went trying to tell me the pattern. But while they were doing that, then they're like, oh, we actually have a problem. I was like, oh, wow. I was pretty impressed that they had noticed this, because I actually don't think I had noticed it until they had pointed it out. And then you can see that the green and the yellow is not matching each other. So then I was like, well, how are we going to solve this? And then, you know, they were trying to come up with solutions. So one person was like, just leave it the way we are, because maybe we just meant it for that. We can just tell them that's the way we want to build it. And then it was like somebody else was saying, we'll just knock it down and start again. And then maybe we was like, we'll take the layers from the top and change the yellow and the green. And then somebody else said, would it not, you know, could we not take them from the bottom? It might be quicker. So, you know, there was great conversations. The children were using their STEM. And then when we really dig deep, there was a lot of math discussion going on there, and the children, when you go back to how they actually built it, they were building it based on, it was completely centered on the mathematics. Pattern hotel, making it nice and tall. And when I highlighted all this to the children, you know, there was a great sense of pride and value. And I found over time, the more I stopped to talk about all the math learning that they were playing with, it really built their confidence and self-esteem in mathematics. This is the last play one I'm going to show you today, but this is actually from my own classroom at the moment in senior infants, and we had the veterinary surgery. And so that idea, the play provides a rich context to promote mathematical language, and it offers us as teachers a space to guide and deepen their mathematical thinking. And then it's thought by, you know, engaging the children in their mathematical processes, and can really help develop mathematical proficiency. In this little scenario, we were in the vet surgery, and in the play dough, they were making some medicine for the sick animals. And in this case, it was for a little dog. And when I went over, I was like, oh, what are you doing here? We're making medicine. And I was like, oh, how many do you have? And they started counting the tablets, as they called it. So and he went 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So I was like, oh, wow, that's very impressive. You're counting in your twos. But before I'd taken this picture, it was just 17. So as he got down to the last one, he's like, oh, I actually have another one. I want to make another one, and then the number will be even. So we talked about odd and even. What did they mean? So there was such great opportunities for rich discussion there. And then I was like, okay, let's take this a little bit step forward. We're talking about, you know, have you ever been to the doctors? Have you ever been prescribed medicine? You know, how do you usually take it? And the conversation came up that sometimes you have to take more than one a day. So I was like, how many does the dog have to take? First of all, it was 2. And I was like, no, I actually think he has to take 3, morning, lunch and night, I think he said. And then I was like, right, okay, let's set up a little problem solving challenge here now for you. I was like, how many days do you think the dog then will have to take these tablets for if he has to take 3 a day? Wasn't really sure what kind of answer I was going to get, but anyway, I put it out there to see what would happen. And straight away, and this little incident, the little boy started making L shapes, and what he was doing is an upside down L and an L shape, and he was then, you know, he was going 3. So that's 1 set, another set, 2 set, 3 set, 4 set, 5 set. So he was covering 3 at a time, and he was making that into a set of 3. So by the end of the time he got to the bottom, he's like 6 days. The dog has to take these for 6 days, and we talked about how did he know that, and we talked about this idea that's repeated addition. So he added 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. You know, we talked a little bit more about like, oh, when you move up on into some of the older classes, you'll be talking about multiplication, and that's exactly, you know, so there's just great richness there from just a little simple Play-Doh activity. And the child in question, you know, I threw the questions out, and I was ready there to scaffold to them if they needed help to solve it. But you know, in this case, they blew my mind by showing me how they thought about it and how they solved it, and it came so natural to them, because they were also building on their own, I suppose, experiences as well, and that's very important within play. So I'm gonna leave play for now, and I do say, if you do want to know any more about play and mathematics, do check out the Maths for All website, because I go into a little bit more detail there if anybody is interested in even just hearing about 3 different types of mathematical play, and I have lots of examples of what does that actually look like, because it's hard to explain in a short webinar like this, but there is a few more examples on the Maths for All website. So what I'm going to look at now is this idea of, I suppose, in more discrete mathematical learning, this idea of using rich mathematical tasks, and how we can use problem-solving skills, develop problem-solving skills using rich mathematical tasks, and by using problem-solving skills and problem-solving approach, we're really thinking back to those 5 pedagogical practices that are outlined in the draft curriculum that suggests can help us as teachers develop children's mathematical proficiency. As you're aware, I am the author of first and second class My Problem Solving Journal, and these problem solving journals have, I think it's 30 tasks. Sorry, they have 30 tasks spread out over all of the strands in the maths curriculum, and there's teaching notes and everything to go with them. And the idea of them, they have maths talk boxes, so some kind of questions for us as teachers, or for the children to talk between themselves to try to further the discussion a little bit further. There's some top tips for children, not on all of them, but you know, if there's any ways of trying to help them get into the problem. There's also extension activities too, so to really help children if they find that activity, you know, they were completed with ease, then how can you extend those learning a little bit further? And they also, with these problems, like there's a variety of tasks. So they're not just all word problems. They are, you know, there could be puzzles, they could be games, they could be based on structures and the investigations, and the idea then there's a lot of open-ended tasks. And they are designed in a way to be low threshold, high ceiling. So there's an entry point for everybody, and depending on where the child is at on their journey of their mathematical learning, that they have some kind of entry point. And I suppose that is an important thing to keep remembering when we go into that new curriculum. We are going to be looking at learning outcomes, and that the idea that the children in our classroom are at all different stages in their learning journey. And you can see that in play when you're talking with them and they're understanding, like some of their thinking is more developed than others. And it's the same when we go to do a task like this. There is such a richness, a variety available within your own classroom. And so these tasks are designed to allow everyone a starting point, and depending on where the children are at, they can take this, they can really take that task a little bit further and get more from it, if they, and depending on where they're at. As I said, I'm teaching senior infants, so I had to ask my colleagues in first class and second class to have a little go with some of these. And one of the examples they'd chosen was one of the earlier place value questions for first class. It's to do with trade, and it's as you can see, it's number 5. So and that's the thing, is like the problems in there might be 3 place value problems, but they are kind of sequenced that they get, there's a progression in them. But anyway, I just was really interested when after the complete, I was like, what did the children think? And you know, the feedback from the children really enjoyed it, and there was great energy. They really loved this idea of working together as a group to try and come up with different ways to solve it. They loved looking at how you could solve it differently, and by doing that, then, you know, there was so much opportunities for great discussion, because like, even look at this example, how the children counted things. Some of them made groups of 10, whereas others were just able to count them individually, and then by the end know that 12 is 1, 10 and 2 units, or you know, it's the same as and you know, just the richness of that alone, about the different approaches to counting things, and sharing that there's not one way to do something, that, you know, we can all see things differently, and we can all we have all different approaches to things, so that, you know, that traditionally, when you say, you give them a question, and straight away the answer is 6, and okay, that's grand, we're moving on. Whereas like, there's so many different ways maybe they got to that answer, and by helping the children see that and validating their responses, it allows them to build up that a great value in their own learning, and seeing themselves as a mathematical learner. Is there anything else? The questions here in first class, the way they do it is like an A could be a simpler part, like as you start the question, and then the B or the C, the later ones are they're a little bit more challenging or a little bit more complex, and sometimes they're more open-ended than others. But in this particular one, in the early stages of first class, they even just, what they did at the end of their lesson is that they got together and they discussed what was all the different ways they could come up with this answer. And, you know, they talked about just looking at the numbers, seeing who had the most pens and trying to put them all together. Or, you know, some of them said, you know, I just knew by looking at whoever had the most numbers that made sense, that they would have the better combination. And just there was this great discussion about how they got to their answer. And as I said, the energy and the motivation to keep going with these tasks, that also supported the children who are probably can be a little bit more anxious during a maths lesson, or if they were doing it themselves, just really unsure of their answers. When they're working in a group with their peers, it's really supportive, and the children can learn a lot from each other. And, you know, seeing how each other represent their answers, there's a lot of learning that goes on between that. In second class, this particular one was to do with fractions. So again, lovely low entry at the beginning, even just how they were, I suppose, representing their answers back. Like this particular one, they end up getting really into the drawing of it and showing visually the halves of the fruits. And then, you know, one of the other ones really wanted just to write it out and to explain it in words. Again, none of these books, you're not going to have 2 books exactly the same, because it's the children's work, and it's children's reflection and understanding of the problem. So, and that is actually the beauty of the problem solving, is that, you know, you don't have to have the same answers, and it is all about showcasing, you know, your creative thinking as well. I actually really like the last part of this problem. Is quite open-ended, and what I mean by that is that there's not just one solution, that there can be more than one solution, and it's up to the children to kind of justify their answers. And that's common thread throughout a lot of the problems in my problem solving journal. You see this one we're saying 6, because just depends, because it says each child either has a half or a quarter of an orange, then how many whole oranges would they have altogether? And then depending on whether you're just going to do them all quarters and only one half, you might have a different answer. Down here, this child is trying to say 9, and, you know, depending on lots of halves and then maybe some quarters at the end. So, you know, once again, they're justifying their thinking, and showcasing how they got their answer. It's a really, really valuable step for them. So the idea of open-ended tasks is the key aspect of it, is engaging children in this discussions that take place either in small group settings or in whole class settings, that emphasis is placed on the generation of the different ideas that the children come up to solve a problem, that there's not just, if you could imagine, just not one motorway to the answer, that there's not just the one correct way, that there's many different ways that they can get there, and helping the children to I suppose to validate that, and helping them to understand that just, you know, they don't all have to think in the same linear path, that they're all coming at things in different directions, because they all have different experiences that got them to be where they are in their mathematical journeys coming into your class. And by contributing the different ideas and sharing the different ideas, the children can learn from each other, and they learn ideas and they learn strategies from their peers. And and I see that over time. You can see how they're like, oh, that's a good idea, and then they'll try that out. You know, I often hear that, and when we're doing problem solving in my classroom in senior infants currently at the moment. So I'm actually going to look a few tasks that I've tried to, I suppose, explore with in my senior infants classroom now that I'm back in senior infants the first time, and after doing all of these problems in first and second class, I was like, okay, I need to try something in my own classroom. And it really is trial and error. I'm refining it every time I go, and I'm sure from senior infants next year I might change my approach a little bit differently, and that is the beauty of it all. And this particular one, I suppose before any of the problems that I've done now that I'm going to show you for senior infants, I do think they can be adapted and changed to suit your junior infants. You know, you might use the numbers, of course, or you might be using less of options. In this case, like you'll see in a few minutes, there was 4 options. You might use all of those, but it's the context you're setting them in, and then getting them to work in small groups and letting them discuss how they're going to solve it. There's such richness involved in that. Particular one, we were having a book fair, and there's been, like, the children ordered the books, and then the books were sent into the school, and then they were divvied out around depending on where they went. So my classroom was right beside the office, so we could see this happening all the time. So I was like, okay, perfect opportunity for a problem. And I said, 7 books have arrived into the office today. Some of them are green and some of them are red. And then the next thing, they were like, and some of them are blue, and some of them, they're like, and some of them are orange. So they grew legs onto their problem. And I was like, okay, let's go with it. Because I knew if not everybody was able for that challenge, I could just tell them, just focus on the 2. It was the children themselves suggested there had to be some blue and had to be some orange. And I suppose when I introduced this problem, I didn't leave any material out for them. Not because I didn't want them to use it, but I just gave them the problem. I was like, okay, let's see. And I suppose maybe what I'm thinking in hindsight is, like, I could have left material. I know it is more of an invitation for them to use it. In this case, their copybooks, their drawing copybooks were on their table. So some of them started picking up their copybooks and see what they're going to do. And the next thing you could see, there was a little bit of, I suppose, that uncomfortableness where as a teacher sometimes you just want to jump in and save them, but you know, you have to just sit it out with them and just kind of like, oh, I wonder now what you could do. And I noticed one of the little girls started drawing 7 boxes, and she said, these are the books. I was like, and what are you going to do here now? And she's like, I'm going to use my colors. So she used her colors to solve the problem. She had some, as you can see that example, some blue, some reds, some greens, and some orange. And when she had done one, you know, we shared it at her table, and then we talked about, is there any other ways you could show me this answer? Is that the only correct way? And then, of course, then that started on to, like, I'll create another possible answer for you. And that was a lot of the problems that are coming up here. Is there maybe there's more than one correct answer? Can you find me another solution? Down at another table, they were using their numbers and they were counting as they were going along. And you can see that, you know, in the early days, they were just playing around with the number placements and the number colors and trying to figure out ways to come up with another solution every time. And then sometimes, you know, I was like, oh, will you check some of them? And then they realize, actually, do you know what, that one only makes 6. So, you know, you're looking as a teacher, you know, observing them. Can they, you know, self-correct? Are they able to see, how could I change that to make that answer fit without having to rub it all out and go again? You know, so that those kind of things, like, it really is great space for us as teachers, using formative assessment to really see where their thinking is, and how where are they in line to, and where do they need a little bit of support with, or where can I help them to encourage them to deepen their learning and their understanding. This next example is just a variety of different ways the children represented this problem. So I don't know if any of you were at Patrick's webinar before Easter, and he talked about mathematical modelling and this concept about children showcasing different ways to find their solution. And like you can hear, you know, you can see the children again, this one was just using the numbers, this one was physically drawing them out. You know, sometimes this one did the numbers and then they decided to just use the colors because they liked the approach to somebody else. And then this particular one, when it's not exactly clear to your eye when you look at it, but the child herself knew exactly what she was doing. And she's like, I have 1 green, 2 red, 2 blue, and 2 yellow, because she knew by the if I put 2 numbers into that color, that's 2 books. You know, so we had lovely, great discussions. But you know, but that was a really interesting one as well, because then you're like, you know, I can see the concept behind it, but again, at the same time, it's not, if you just seen that in isolation, you wouldn't necessarily get the answer from it very clear. So there was lovely moments for me as a teacher to see where the thinking was, and you know, and I was able to question her on it. I was like, and how would somebody else interpret, you know, I didn't say interpreted, but you know, how would somebody else read your answers and find out the solutions to your problem? So and some children, you know, and again, you know the children in your class better. I knew that child was able to articulate her answers and was trying to explain it to me. Then, you know, we talked and we showcased some of the other answers. We compared, and the children loved looking at the different ways to represent it. And I suppose you'll see that through some of the other examples that I have here. This is a particular one, you know, just your traditional number story. And I think I said to them, I was like, we were doing the bakery, and I said that 9 cupcakes were ready and they're, you know, we're about to put out and display onto the bakery, but we just have 2 plates. How many will we put on each plate? And I left them to it. Some children automatically saw that, you know, this is a number story, so, you know, straight away into the robotic, 1 and 8, 2 and 7, 3 and 6, and they found all these different ways. And then other children got, like, they saw it differently. They were thinking, I want to make the 2 plates as even as I can. So they were putting, you know, putting 4, and then they realized that 9 was an odd number, so they had 4 and 5. Another group were thinking, I just want to try and see if I can get them all on 1 plate. And then another group was thinking, I just want to put them together in terms of, do they look nice together? So, you know, there was this great discussion, and then eventually, like, some of them were, what I could see was, I could really understand I could see the children who got the concept of like breaking a number up and seeing all the different, I suppose, bonds that made that number. And then I could see the children who were able to do it, but maybe weren't, you know, they didn't have a logical flow to it. Like they just were doing randomly 4 and 5, and then they might have 1 and 8, and, you know, and what for me, I could see, I was like, okay, well, you know, maybe for them, their thinking still needs to be a bit more developed there, that they aren't making all those connections just yet. They're able to do the task, but they haven't connection yet. And that's what you're always looking for. Can the children see connections? Can they see patterns in their learning? And you're helping them identify them and explore them through your discussions and the questions that you're asking them. The next one, I won't talk too much about this one, but again, it's another bakery question where I was like, 9 customers came into the bakery today and they all bought a cookie. Some bought chocolate chips, some bought, I think it was lemon, and some bought blueberry, and then they were like some bought strawberry, so they added the 4th one. And because I knew my class was able to explore this a little bit further. We'd be doing lots and lots of practice. I was like, you can use whatever you want. So I left it really open. It probably was too open for some of them, because some of them really didn't know where to start. So I left a box. I was like, oh, maybe we could use something on it. So I left an invitation to use maybe cubes or blocks or things. And then there was other groups who really got into it, and like they went themselves and got their teddy bears, and then they represented their cookies by using different colored cubes or different colored counters, and then even how they were laying them up, you know, like in this one they had 9 in a row, but they had you know, they were sorting them into the different cookies. So yeah, so when then by the time of all that, they all had examples, and then I was encouraging them to find another solution. Then we stop for a moment and we walk around the room and have a look at all the different examples that we can have, and we have great discussion about there was more than one answer, and look at all the different ways children were able to show their answer. And the children absolutely loved it. Like, they love showing off anything that they've made. So for them to get the chance to do that, it was so invaluable to them. Another one, there's a very good one of these actually on Maths for All website, where it is actually videos of a senior infant classroom, and it's talking about parcels being delivered into the classroom. I was using a very similar one. We have the post office. It's like, there is 8 envelopes have arrived into the office, so many of them for our principal and some of them for our secretary. How many do you think each of them got? And off they went and had great discussions. I think the next day I might have added in a third person, and some of them wrote their answers down straight away. Some of them were physically using the envelopes, or again, some of them were representing using different counters or different things that we had in our classroom. And then the last one that I'm going to show you now for this evening is and I think I suppose what I'm showing these for you as an examples of just things that are happening in our classroom, all of these play themes, all of the different areas that we have. I'm just trying to create little problems for them. You don't always have to like have set in these, but for the children in senior infants, they really was a really great start for them. You know, it was something practical. It was something that had meaning to it, as real to life as you possibly can, and they had such great fun exploring with it. And I could see how they could physically do it, and then they were being able to, you know, write some of their answers down on their drawing copies, as I mentioned. And then I'm just imagining how they're going to be in first class, you know, when they have the idea of my problem solving journal in front of them. You know, that this is leading them towards problem solving in that context. And this particular one, there's a very similar one in my problem solving journal for first class, where the children are invited to bring pets to school in the problem, and they talk about how many feet are in the classroom. And this one, I said that we were in the veterinary surgery, and I said there's 10 feet waiting to see the vet in the surgery. Who owns these feet? So then they had great discussions, and they had different combinations of all the different animals that possibly be. And when I went to one table, this was all the teddies that they had, and they just put it down. And then we had great discussions. Does this work? And then they were like, no, because we have too many legs. And we counted all the legs, and we found out we had 20 legs. And then we even just talked with the animals that they just had, like, were we ever going to be able to just make 10? And they were like, no, because each of those animals had 4. And then as we went on, then we're like, so 5 must not be an answer for us. And one of the other children were like, I think 5 could be an answer. So instead of letting that child explain, I was like, okay, hold on, let's for a little moment. I think we made a big discussion about whether do we agree or disagree that 5 could be a possible answer, because we were getting lots of 3s. And at this stage we hadn't got a 4, it was just all 3s. And you know, they kind of sat with it for a little while, and then one of the children said, well, we could have 5 owls, because they all had 2 feet. And we're like, oh yeah, very good. And then I said, is there any other ways we could have 5 animals? And eventually then they told me, no, we can use animals that have no feet. And there they went off, and then they were creating more and more solutions, and then they tried to find 4 solution, and they just had at this game I had to tell them at the end, I was like, okay, you know, we'll have to wrap it up, because they were really getting into it, and they were just coming up with all the different possibilities, and they want to keep increasing the number of vets or pets for the vet, to see that the vet was going to have some kind of shock when he realized he only had 10 feet, but maybe he had 100 animals to see. So they had great excitement with all of that. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope it was of some use to you all, even just to start some conversations about mathematics. Tonight I took a lot of the research and the draft curriculum all from the NCCA. And as I said to you, I mentioned Maths for All. If you haven't already checked it out, I would really recommend it, and even sign up for the newsletter, because there's a lot of webinars that comes on board with Maths for All. And as I say, there's some really good professional learning communities of just getting teachers who are really interested in an area just to kind of explore it and maybe try things out in their classroom, and then feedback to a small group to see what's working well, what's not working well. But just again, it's just that having a community of sharing practices. And then if anybody is wanting to check out some of the problems with their first or second class, the problems are available at the minute on the Folens website. If you just go into the books and programs, and you'll see first class or second class, and you can see the books. You put the books up on your interactive whiteboards, and have a little look at them with the children, and let them even do it on blank pieces of paper if you don't have the books in front of you right now, and just to get a feel for some of the problems, and maybe an idea to remind yourself, like, even as teachers, the first few times you do it, you mightn't think you get as much from it, but the more you do these types of problems, I know myself, you get more confident using them, and you definitely are able to get much richer results from them as well, because you're more comfortable working with them. And even I would say to you, in junior and senior infants, have a look at some of even the first class problems and the second class problems, just to see the kind of style of them, and see how you can maybe interpret them into your own classroom, just some of the thinking behind it, and that's exactly what I did in my classroom here in senior infants. So thanks very much. I'm going to hand you back over here now to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Elaine. That was really interesting. Thanks a million. Just a very quick update from me before we have time for your questions. And if you have any questions for Elaine, if you just want to stick them into the chat box. I think we've already mentioned that all the books and some sample teaching notes are up, open access on folens.ie. So if you do want to try them out for yourself, you can. Then just very quickly, we understand that it is a very busy time, particularly with the introduction of the new school book grant. So we just wanted to remind you that your local Folens rep is available for calls and consultations at a time that suits you and your colleagues. So your reps can help you with a number of different things, including product information from across our portfolio, a range of samples to review, and help with getting the best value for your school budget. So all the rep contact details are available on our website on folens.ie. We also have, as part of the range of supports for the school book grant, we've a range of special offers and bundles. Again, the information is on folens.ie, and your reps can walk you through it in detail. There's vouchers back, 15% voucher back across the portfolio. We also have a range of super saver offers on our very popular supplementary program. So handwriting, dictionaries, class novels, and my problem solving journal as well, and many more. So if you want to have a look at them, we have a phonics bundle for junior infants to second class, which includes complimentary set of decodable readers. And then last but by no means least, we have a range of digital subscription packages, both for infants and for whole school. So all the details, as I said, are on the website or with your rep. And just to finally let you know that we have a music webinar coming up on the 9th of May. You can register through folens.ie, and Anne Purcell, one of the authors of Into Music, will take you through everything you need to teach music with ease. Okay, so if Karen and Elaine can join me now for the Q&A, I think I saw a couple of questions there earlier. So I think one or two of the questions were answered, but I think one of the questions which might be for yourself, Karen, is will you be reissuing the My Problem Solving Journal series when the curriculum is updated?
Sorry, I just realised I had my mic on. No, because the journals were just published last year, but the problems aren't really, I guess, independent of the curriculum. A problem is a problem. So there's nothing, I would say, within the new draft curriculum that would require us to change the problems in My Problem Solving Journal. So really, I think what we're talking about is not so much with the new curriculum change necessarily, that all the content is changing. I mean, maths is maths. It's more, I guess, a shift in emphasis from the approach to having a more problem-solving, inquiry-centered approach.
Great. Another one of the questions, I think, some of which was covered, but Elaine, the problems, do they follow stages rather than grade levels? Just in case a couple of people need the answer to that one.
They're designed at the moment into the class groups, and they reflect, I suppose, the strands and the strand units that are covered in the curriculum, and they are designed to be low threshold, high ceilings. So that idea was even in your own class, like, okay, you could be in first class, but you will have different stages. So the idea of those the problems in that journal is that they are designed to be interpreted in terms of where the child is at. So there is scope for further extension. So you would be able to take in the different stages that the children are within. But I suppose they are organised in the class grouping for now.
Yeah, and then another question as well. How would these problem-solving activities work in a multi-grade classroom?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't teach multi-grades, but I guess like what you have to think about, again, so it comes back to that same idea, the low threshold, high ceiling. It really depends on how, I suppose, you're organising how you're teaching maths, whether they're working off their separate their contents. But even some of those problems, like you are the expert in your classroom, and you will be able to see, can this fit my classes? Like, even getting them to work together, even a couple of them, getting them to share ideas of how to go about solving problems using strategies. There's so much richness in there. And then equally, I really think that you could have two problems go in parallel, if that was the case in a multi-grade situation, and just even the rich conversations that could come from that. I think they could lend themselves very well.
Brilliant. And then any suggestions as to how you could organise your class around the activities? Like, what's the best approach?
Yeah, so what I've been doing is I've been delivering it whole class, but I've already told them, like, they're going to be working in groups, and I do think that's the main thing here, that they are working in groups, so they're getting an opportunity to share their ideas. So, depending on your class size, I find with my senior infants, group of 3 is a lovely number for them. And I only have 20, so I appreciate that is small class. So I do have lots of groups of 3s, but it works really well for the smaller ones, because they all have an opportunity. Like, it's not just one person leading it. There's loads. They have an opportunity to follow if they need to follow, or an opportunity to lead it where they can. And I think, like, in the older classes, you could definitely have like 4 children, maybe 5 in a group. But probably 4 is probably more rich for them in terms of being able to get the most out of the problem.
Great. I think that's all the questions